Last week, a release date was finally revealed for Halo Reach for the Master Chief Collection on both Xbox One and the PC, and we had a chance to play it, or at least Richard did. You see, he was there at XO19 with a live demonstration running on the PC and captured all of this gameplay in beautiful 4K 60. But of course, he is currently tied up testing the Stadia, so I got my fellow huge Halo fan, Alex Battaglia, instead to discuss this footage. Alex, how's it going?
Oh, it's going great. I mean, I'm super psyched right now to play Reach on PC finally. Somehow I missed all these test flights, or test fights as they're called. I have no idea how that happened.
That's a shame, because it is shaping up really well, and it's an interesting situation, obviously. I mean, Halo Reach was the one Bungie Halo game that was pretty much trapped on its original platform for a long time.
Yeah, right.
And, I think it's cool that the Master Chief Collection is still sort of receiving support, if you will, as well as the release on the PC, and this is kind of a great way to sort of bring people back and just a chance to revisit Reach in a new light.
Yeah.
And based on this footage here, I'd say it's looking excellent, and it solves some of the major issues I think we had with the original 360 release.
Yeah, I mean, we've been lucky in the past that Microsoft has given this game attention already, because obviously it was one of the first games enabled through the back compatibility enhanced program. But not enhanced in the typical way of upgrading its resolution. Rather, it would just run and utilize your Xbox One or Xbox One X's hardware if you ran in back compatibility mode. So
what's interesting about that is, if you recall, Richard did an interview with the BC team for Xbox, and Halo Reach, I tested it back in the day when it first showed up on the BC program, and it ran significantly worse than 360.
Exactly.
And they cited our tests on that game as the reason to really beef up the way they test and figure out backwards compatibility stuff, going from sort of subjective testing to objective testing. And now, if you play this on backwards compatibility, the experience is definitely dramatically superior to the regular 360 version, but it was still limited in resolution, as you say, and frame rate, of course.
Yeah, so like the original release was kind of, I wouldn't say completely swan song, but end of the generation Xbox 360 game, pushing the Xbox 360 in directions where it wasn't the best at, like deferred rendering and, tons of effects on screen at all the time, and, post-process anti-aliasing that we'll talk about very soon. It didn't run perfectly well. Xbox 360 back compatibility helped it a lot, but it was still stuck at that 30 FPS. And all those wonderful, animations that the game has regarding like the way the elites move, duck in and out of cover, and, throw grenades and avoid grenades, and all these awesome things kind of stuck at 30 FPS. Finally, seeing it at 60, it just looks way better. It's not even not even a contest at this point.
It's interesting to see each of these games sort of enhanced for the Master Chief Collection, in that it sort of more closely reveals the art, I guess, behind them. Yeah. And you really get to see it in a new light. And I feel like this is actually one of the ones that holds up best.
Yeah, and
it almost feels like the art itself had been crafted to be displayed at a higher resolution, especially all the foliage, the trees, the distant textures, and the texture filtering, of course, help. Everything is just so much more defined, like beautifully crisp.
It kind of reminds me of like the Dark Souls games. The Dark Souls games were arted in a way where they have extremely nice looking textures upon closer inspection, but it's pretty much lost in the games like that were found on Xbox 360 or PS3. You could barely see that detail. Now, with the enhanced resolution that you'll see both on Xbox One, Xbox One X, and PC, you can finally see all that detail Bungie put into the character models. And the textures still look pretty okay on a lot of them, I would say.
Yeah, I would say. Now, so for this demo then, Richard did actually jump into the options menu here, so you can see kind of what's available on the PC version, and hopefully some of this will carry over to Xbox as well. But one of the main things I see is that there's an FOV slider for both the first-person gameplay and in vehicles. I always felt that the FOV was somewhat constrained in the original 360 game, so being able to pull this out definitely makes for a better time, I would say. Although we don't really have any comparison here, that'll wait for the final video, but that's one of the more promising things.
And also one of the most promising things I would say in this menu is the enhanced graphical quality option, or like the ability to change the graphical quality of the game, and also the res scaling option. I'm a huge fan of res scaling in games. I do like the ability to downsample games through the driver, but I would always prefer if it's a native option. And here, them having that option is exactly looking what a PC port needs. And I'm really grateful that's already in.
And I'm wondering what kind of hardware you'll need, because this is an older game after all, so I can imagine that it should be fairly easy to downsample.
I think the recommended specs for 4K 60 were something like a GTX 770. So
Okay.
it wasn't too much. Yeah.
But yeah, so Richard actually went through and captured the introduction cutscenes in both the enhanced and original mode. And by comparing them, I was at least able to suss out the difference. And it is somewhat subtle. So in the initial cutscene, there really isn't actually any difference. They look basically 100% identical. But in the next scene, we actually do find out what this does. And there's basically two main things. Essentially, it pushes out the draw distance of things like grass, foliage, and whatnot.
Yeah.
And also, it changes the LOD values. So basically, you're getting more distant objects that are fully detailed from a distance, as opposed to the swapped in low quality LODs that you see in the original version, which was obviously designed with the 360 in mind.
Yeah.
So as a result, in this because we don't have any real gameplay comparison yet, you can at least see here the difference between this scene here with the wall, this distant canister thing here, and the grass. Like, everything's kind of pushed out a bit, so it does give it this more stable look.
Yeah.
And all the gameplay we've been looking at here, by the way, is running in the enhanced mode, I should note.
Yeah, and this is a big deal because it's pretty often the fact that when you go back and play a game, even on PC, made for, decades old hardware, you'll see all the LOD problems, and there's no way to change that. But luckily here we can play a decade old game, but still be able to push out the LOD value, so you're not constantly seeing that switching or extremely low fidelity models close to the screen. And this is a big deal for high resolution displays, because if at a high res, you can definitely see the problems of LOD much better in the distance, and it's pretty often the case that you'll be playing a game at 4K and be seeing models that were meant for 720p,
Exactly.
So,
That's the big thing. On 360, this stuff is much less noticeable. When you're at a high res and a high frame rate, all of those things become much more obvious and annoying. So thankfully, by adding this option here, this should make for a much more stable visual experience. And I guess the big question for me is whether this is available on the Xbox as well.
I
don't know if they've touched on that. Maybe that's been announced somewhere, but I'm not sure yet.
I haven't seen that at all yet either.
That's going to be something we have to test.
Yeah, I would hope so, because I can't imagine it being too system resource demanding. But I guess another thing to talk about, like the biggest obvious difference beyond the frame rate and the resolution, would be the removal of the game's temporal AA that they originally had.
Thank goodness.
So, yeah.
To set the stage here, you got to remember that Halo Reach came out during a time when developers were really starting to sort of experiment with anti-aliasing techniques. Obviously, things like FXAA from Timothy Lotz had first been developed. I can't remember exactly when that happened, but
I want to say it was
sometime
just a little bit after this, actually.
Yeah, it was around the same time. And obviously, Crytek was experimenting with the Crysis 2 AA solution.
Yeah.
There was MLAA introduced in that one, the Saboteur, I think it is.
Saboteur, yeah, based upon an Intel demo of
exactly
using MLAA on the CPU. So
exactly, and that ran on the Cell processor. So all these developers were basically like, okay, well, MSAA is too expensive, so we really can't do that, and we want some kind of anti-aliasing, so they were coming up with solutions. And Bungie's solution to it,
it's a good idea in theory.
A good idea in theory, but at the frame rate it runs at, it kind of especially, you get a lot of ghosting and trailing artifacts that make everything look like it's just kind of ethereal almost, but not in a good way.
I mean, the idea in practice is, like, if this camera sits still and an object sits still, it basically gets 2 times super sample anti-aliasing. That's great, but objects move, so they had the ability to flag an object that moved, so it would turn off the SSAA reprojection, the temporal SSAA reprojection there. The thing is, it didn't work often, I don't think, or just the scenarios that it was presented didn't work, and it was I thought the game was constantly ghosting. And then
I think when objects would move suddenly and it would happen too quickly, the game simply couldn't keep up with it, especially when something moves in close proximity to the camera for us. then it's just like, ghosting everywhere. And it was very severe.
Yeah, it definitely, especially on the Xbox 360 at the time with its lower frame rate because it wasn't holding 30 FPS, it looked not the greatest, but now seeing it off here, the game just looks extremely smooth in comparison without any of that kind of flickery.
And obviously, when we properly cover the final release of this, we'll get some nice comparisons in there so we can more easily visualize the difference.
Believe me, I'm going to be all over this PC version.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is going to be very interesting to see. But yeah, I mean, as you can see, I mean, just on the surface of it, this looks excellent. Yeah. And it still looks like it's going to be a blast to play. And honestly, for my money, I think this was one of Bungie's best Halo games.
Yeah.
I feel like in some ways it felt like a return to almost the wonder of Halo 1, if you will.
In terms of feeling, it has a feeling about it. Obviously, a lot of people, I think, in the community dislike this game due to its approach to multiplayer, which is something that...
And I understand that. I don't disagree with that.
I wouldn't disagree with that either. But in terms of the way the single-player campaign played out, like, it has this kind of like forlorn, wondrous feeling about it because you're constantly discovering... You're doing kind of a bit of globe traveling like you do in Halo 1, which is really great. But at the same time, you're playing a story that already has a concrete ending. You know what happens on Reach before the game starts. That's, and it has a really great feeling to it. And I like the way it plays, too, in the single-player campaign specifically. I like having a squad of people around me. It felt a bit like the best parts of Halo 1.
Exactly. It really, and the wide open terrain, and they even have a mission that's sort of a nod to the Truth and Reconciliation mission, I guess, from Halo 1, going around at nighttime and everything. But
I guess the big thing for me is also having an assault rifle that doesn't sound and feel bad when you shoot it. Halo 3 brought back the assault rifle, but it kind of, felt a bit like shooting like paper bullets. Halo Reach's assault rifle, while looking a bit like weird prototype future techie, actually sounds really good and feels good to shoot.
Yeah, exactly. And also, it's interesting that Reach itself, the technology behind it, ultimately kind of served as a basis for what would become Destiny's technology.
Yeah, right.
So a lot of it was derived from their work here. So this was kind of like both the beginning and the end of an era of Bungie.
Yeah, right.
So...
I mean, there's so much to talk about when the video comes out, but like them using what are basically GPU particles, things like horizon-based ambient occlusion. It should be really interesting to see in the final project with side-by-sides to see how these things scale to higher resolution and higher frame rate.
That's right. You're right. Ambient occlusion in general was still relatively new in the console space at the time. I mean, Crytek implementing that in 2007 in Crysis was a huge revelation. And so we started to see a lot of developers discover and experiment with their own solutions. And using horizon-based ambient occlusion in Halo Reach was kind of a big deal.
I remember them saying in vid docs beforehand, or at least I think in tech presentations, that since the game doesn't have really a lot of real-time shadows, it's a Halo game. They don't really use those except for like small parts of Halo 2, really. They don't use, or for cutscenes, that in the distance, the way horizon-based AO would work is it would kind of get fatter and a little bit wider, and it would look like a drop shadow in the distance. So as characters further went out from the camera, it would almost look like they had a shadow map under them. So like they did a lot of really cool stuff to make it look really great on 360. And on PC, I will have to see, but I hope a lot of these effects kind of hold up and don't scale poorly with resolution.
I think there is lots to experiment there, but obviously, we will experiment more with that when it hits in December, and hopefully we'll check it out on both Xbox One and PC. And I'm also curious, the Master Chief Collection does support HDR.
Yeah. Right.
And it's variable per game. So, like, some of them work very well, others do not. But Halo 3, due to the way they did the lighting buffers there, actually worked beautifully.
Yeah.
But I'm fairly certain that has changed for Halo Reach when they made the engine swap. But I'll be curious to see how they sort of implement an HDR style mode into this and what the final results are like.
And also if it works on PC, that'll be a thing to look at.
Yes, of course. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for this video. So thanks for coming along on the ride here, Alex.
Of course. Reach is one of my favorite Halo games. Yeah.
And I hope you guys enjoyed some nice, fresh 4K 60 capture because, it looks good, I think. But if you did enjoy it, of course, be sure to like and subscribe and ring that notification bell as always, and follow us over on Twitter. And until next time, this is John and Alex saying, until next time.
Und auf Wiedersehen.
Exactly.